and welcome to the Debrief. This is Carolina Journal's weekly recap of all the stories we've covered this week in North Carolina politics, public policy. I'm Donna King. I'm editor-in-chief of the Carolina Journal. I'm glad you're with us this week. Few new faces on the couches. Of course, Alex Balsagar. He's been covering the legislature all week. Got a lot of stories from him. And joining us this week, Jim Sterling from the John Locke Foundation. We're going to be talking about elections with Jim. And then, of course, Nick Craig, host of the Wilmington's Morning News on WAAV. Thanks for coming. I appreciate you making the trip down.
Absolutely.
And Dallas Woodhouse, Executive Director of American Majority North Carolina. We have a lot to talk about this week, so we're going to jump right in. We have details on the proposed election bill that Republican leadership filed this week. We're talking a lot about that. There's been some pushback from Democrats creating a narrative, talking a lot about conspiracy theories. Also, Dallas has a great interview with Virginia Foxx. She has a big announcement for us. So we'll be talking about all of this, plus North Carolina's cities have some really rocky roads. All right, let's jump right in. Alex, bring us up to date. What have you been watching this week?
So there's two bills I want to talk about. The first one is Senate Bill 512. Okay. This is a bill that alters appointment powers. It takes some appointment powers from the governor and transfers them to other members of the executive branch and sometimes the legislature itself. And the Senate and House had different versions. The Senate wanted to change appointment powers for 9 boards and commissions, but the House only wanted to do 8. And the difference was the House didn't want to do the North Carolina Utilities Commission. It didn't want to tweak that at all. So we'll see what happens, though, because they're still in negotiations there. I could see the Utilities Commission getting thrown back in there. But yeah, we'll see with that one. The other one I want to talk about is Senate Bill 747, and that's the big elections bill that's been discussed a lot in the news recently. But this bill, which I think Jim will touch on this a little bit later, but it changes some of our election laws, not necessarily a lot pertaining to how people are actually voting, but it changes some things on how our voting laws are supposed to be implemented and stuff like that. But the narrative around that has been interesting because none of the narrative has focused on anything about the bill itself. And what they've decided to focus on is this person named Cleta Mitchell who met with lawmakers briefly, although that might actually be disingenuous to say that it was a meeting between Cleta Mitchell and lawmakers because she just got invited kind of last minute by someone else who they were actually meeting with. Right. And so the narrative there has been interesting this week.
Sure.
Just so people know, Cleta Mitchell is an attorney. She has worked on elections, things for many years. I personally know her. She's a lovely lady. She lives down in the Southern Pines area. She was an attorney that represented President Trump in some of the issues, particularly in Georgia. She was on the phone call that was made to the Georgia Secretary of State, which has been so controversial.
So why are they so focused on
that? Well, because this is what the Democrats in North Carolina have started to do. They have gotten into the point where they don't actually engage in substantive discussions about lawmaking and governing. As Jim will talk about, this elections bill is pretty minor. Let me just say that let's talk about who it doesn't change, and it is about 99.5% of voters. If you vote on election day, it doesn't change you. If you vote in person, it doesn't change you. For the most part, if you're already registered, it doesn't change you. It affects 2 things: people who register same day and vote, which is a minuscule amount of people, even the people who will newly register this year, and people who vote by mail and decide to turn in their ballots very late. We'll talk about that more. I mean, it's a very small thing. And so what they've done is they have fear-mongered. They've picked on Cleta Mitchell because of her loose connections to President Trump. It's really kind of disgusting.
Right.
It's really sexist. They've done this with Tricia Cotham, made her to be a boogeyman because she changed parties. But the elections bill.
Well, real quick before we go on, I want to hear real quick from Senator Dan Blue. We have his comments. This was a press conference he gave earlier this week alluding to what we're talking about here.
One of the fundamental differences between Republicans and Democrats is that one of these parties values robust involvement in democracy. The other values raw power. That's what we're seeing play out across the country and what we see here in Senate Bill 747. This bill suppresses voting opportunities, throws out legal ballots, and weakens already underfunded elections boards. And as part of a coordinated effort by Trump operatives, like Cleta Mitchell, to sway elections one vote at a time. It's been confirmed that Ms. Mitchell, who was heavily involved in Donald Trump's failed attempts to overturn the 2020 elections, played a role in crafting this legislation. Word by word, quote by quote.
Okay, so Jim, tell me what you think. That it does sound concerning. Do you think they're right to be concerned about this? Because it sounds like, from what Dallas says and from what I read, it doesn't really impact that many people.
No. As Dallas kind of alluded to on this, 1,700 people registered, and what we like to refer to as ghost voters.
Okay.
They did the same day registration, but they didn't have their their address verified by the State Board of Elections office. So when you vote, when you get registered to vote, they send you a certification, make sure that you are living at that address, and you return it to them. That's how they certify that you are a resident, you are a legal citizen, you are someone who is supposed to be voting, and this is your current address. So this is your ballot, these are the candidates you're going to be voting for in the races that you're going to be voting for based on your district.
Sure.
And if you fail that verification process, which sometimes there are legitimate clerical errors, you have to clear this up before you vote. And what we have in North Carolina is an equal protection problem. And that is that if you are 90% of people who register in the traditional way, get the form, send it into the Board of Elections well before the election, you have to go through the verification process. And that's a good process. If you register and vote during the early voting period, which we refer to as same-day registration and voting, you can fail that verification and have your vote counted. And 1,700 people had that happen. That is a problem. North Carolina should treat all voters the same. I would argue that under the federal Constitution, they are required to do so. As you heard with the Democrats there, they won't engage in that problem. Okay, here, what is the second big change in this voting bill? There's some other little tweaks. They're not really that important. The other big one is we are moving. Current law today says that if you vote by mail, you could put your ballot in the mail. And if it is postmarked and stamped by the post office on Election Day and it arrives by Friday, your vote could count. Now, the Republicans want to move that back 3 days to say you have to have your ballot in by Election Day. Now, you can disagree with that position. You can say it would be better to give people a couple days grace period. But let's remember why this is happening. The Democrat State Board of Elections made an argument that you could not rely on the post office's postmark, that the postmark didn't count. So therefore, they would count in ballots that came in with no postmark or postmarks beyond the 3-day deadline. So therefore, it is the Democrats that attacked the postmark requirement. So if you're not going to rely on the postmark, the 3-day time period doesn't matter, and you have to go by Election Day. 30 states say that if you're going to vote by mail, you have to your ballot on Election Day. It's obviously reasonable. You can disagree with it, but we're talking a minuscule amount of voters, and most people will look at the deadline that is in the new paperwork and they will change their behavior.
And you say something interesting there. This is, you said the bill number 747, so it's been deemed the jumbo jet election bill with all of these crazy things that are in it. And when you break it down, I think most people would feel that it's reasonable that by 7:30 p.m. on election night, when you try to go to a poll at 7:31, the door's closed. You can't vote.
Do you think this is about trusting the elections? I mean, you get a lot of calls on your show about this. Well, only about half of people say it'll be free and fair.
Even Democrat polls in the state. I saw one this past week that was run in November from a prominent news organization. 25% of unaffiliated voters, not Democrats, not Republicans, did not feel that their votes might be counted and cast in a fair manner. That's a huge problem. That's our largest voting bloc.
And let's talk about the lies the Democrats have told here. Okay, number one, that this is an attempt for Republicans to keep people from voting. Well, if it is the lousiest attempt that Republicans could ever do, because this would affect less than 0.5% of all voters in North Carolina, maybe 1%. Number two, in 2016, and I believe in 2020, people who registered and voted on the same day voted for Trump. So if they are cutting out votes, they are potentially cutting out their own voters. They are doing it so all voters are treated the same. Again, the Democrats have virtually raised no objections to the actual substantive issues in this bill, and nor have they said there's a different way to address this. There's a different way to address the 1,700 voters. Their answer is we ought to let the 1,700 invalid voters cast ballots.
Right, and here's the thing. We're all talking about substantive policies that are in this bill, but the whole narrative, we've never talked about substance of this bill. We've been focused on Cleta Mitchell.
Right.
Well, this should not be our narrative.
And-
It is the Democrats' narrative and the liberal press's narrative.
That's right, and some of the Dan Blue was not the only guy who mentioned Cleta Mitchell. It was first brought up really by WRAL, and then Governor Roy Cooper sort of tagged along on that. Josh Stein tagged along on that. Robert Reeves tagged along on that, and then you saw right there Senator Dan Blue tagging along on that, and that got a lot of traction on Twitter at least, and then circulated the press. I think NNO's got some pieces on that. WUNC had the same exact narrative. So.
Again, there were virtually
So
no.
one picked it up and everybody else just followed along.
That's right.
Well, I mean, they have made Cleta Mitchell to be some kind of Jason Voorhees of politics because she happened to work for Trump. Let me just say something about Cleta Mitchell. Cleta Mitchell is a citizen of the state of North Carolina. Right. She has every right to go and under the Constitution to address government, talk to lawmakers and address government for perceived grievances, just as everybody here at this table does and just like every other Democrat does. Where's the Democrats' alternative bill in response to address these matters?
It'll come in like 8 or 9 months.
Yeah, exactly.
After it's all set.
Right.
But as you were kind of saying on this, does anybody know how many days we have for mail-in ballots? We're the number one in the country. We have 60 days.
60 days.
60.
That means if you
Is that
request
number one in the
a
country?
ballot,
Yes.
if you request a ballot to vote
Right.
early, you get it at Labor Day before a November election.
Right. You
So
have
from a
60 days.
policy standpoint, what do you think? Where are we on this?
These last 3 days, as Dallas has talked about, has been about what the Board of Elections has done. I mean, we've talked about the sue and settle stuff that they've done in years past, but a lot of these issues, and one other issue that they address in here, which is the Valerie Jordan situation, where they didn't allow any
Tell us
appeal
what that is.
process. So Valerie Jordan had a dispute about where she was living. She was running in a district, I believe, in Wake County. You covered this story quite a bit during the time, but she had an address out in the eastern part of the state instead of in Wake County. That was contested at the Board of Elections. They found that there was evidence of it, sent up to the State Board of Elections, and they dismissed the case. There was no appeal process for that afterwards.
Right.
And now this allows this to go to the Superior Court rather than just be dead if a 3-2 Democrat majority on the Board of Elections throws it out.
Now, I want to make a prediction going back to something that Alex talked about here in the beginning, and that's the appointment issue. Let me tell you what's getting ready to happen. I believe, I don't have this officially, but with all this talk about of elections and appointments, they're getting ready to come together in the next few weeks. At some point, the Republicans are going to suggest and put a bill forward that changes the makeup of the state and the county boards of elections. Right now, the boards of elections are controlled by the party of the governor. The Republicans tried to change this a few years ago, and the Democrat state Supreme Court blocked them from doing so. We now have a new court. The Republicans are going to try to change this, and this would make evenly split state boards of elections and county boards of elections. With that said, all these changes and appointments are really about rolling back what the courts have done over the last 8 years, and that is empowered the executive branch through the appointment process. The legislature is going to try to take back that power. They're going to take it back on these various boards that you talked about, but they're most importantly going to try to take it back and have an evenly split Board of Elections. And by the time that the Republicans suggest that, these minor changes in the election are not going to be a big deal. The Democrats are going to, blow another gasket.
All right, so the temperature really is heating up, though. All of this headed toward 2024. Jim, you're focused very heavily on what's going on with the money. We've been doing that Follow the Money series for a while. What are you seeing happening just in the last few weeks?
So the governor's been pretty active on this, as well as a lot of the members. They've been talking about all their top issues. Now it's gun control. Last week it was on the education issues. Governor made a state of emergency, which obviously was one of the weirdest ones. It's gotten laughed at by
It's
a
still
lot
up
of
there.
people in the nation.
Yeah, it's still on the
Yeah,
website.
that's
Yeah.
still up there on the big red bar.
State of emergency about education, and
Yeah.
this was after barnstorming the state in a failed attempt to block some minor
So this
changes
is
to
really a big
abortion law.
fundraising push.
Well, I mean, 2 minutes after he sent that video out, he didn't even do it live. He put out a email that was trying to fundraise off this very issue. He didn't put an executive order on
Sure,
this.
I think we have that fundraising text thread or blast text that went up. But he really is. He's looking to fundraise off of what amounts to losses.
Well, I guess
Yeah.
I think it makes sense though when you look at it. Right now, you've got a super majority in the North Carolina Republican in the General Assembly. Republican control on the court. What are Democrats left to do besides fundraise?
Sure.
They can't sue till blue and try to ram everything through the court system. So I guess raise a bunch of cash.
All due respect, Nick, I actually fundamentally disagree with that.
Sure.
Really?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think that Democrats can and could affect legislation should they chose to engage.
Oh, of course.
I mean, Republicans would like to work with Democrats. If Democrats have better ideas how to keep people who failed verification from voting or how to fix that problem, Republicans would listen. If they have a better idea, to address the issues they brought up with postmarks, Republicans would listen, but the Democrats have chosen to take the easy way out,
Right.
not engage in lawmaking, and just engage in politics, and I think it is a decision they will regret.
Well,
Sure.
we've seen this with the Cotham thing. I mean, come on. She disagreed on one of the bills on this, wasn't present at the vote, and her and 2 other Democrats were demonized. I mean, quite honestly, that was one of the worst things. You can talk about the situation when it was just her, but all of them were getting villainized at the second they missed that vote. This was on the pistol
Gun
purchase
permit
permit.
bill.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
The pistol purchase permit, which was about sheriffs being able to sign off if you are allowed to get a gun. This is a remnant of Jim Crow era to begin with. So
Right.
they took a walk on that. They weren't present for the vote, whether that be for health issues or otherwise, but the amount of just vitriol we saw from the left and these organizations that were already calling for primaries on these individuals.
Yeah, but they have a motivated base. They have a motivated group that they seem to be able to reach into when they have issues like gun control, abortion, things like that, and draw in those donations, even if they're running on a loss.
Well, if
Do
they
you
have a
think that's working?
motivated base, then why are they continuing to have to placate them and only play to
Right.
them rather than try to actually
Do
represent
you
the
think it's
voters
working?
that sent them there?
Yeah, do you think it's working?
Yes and no. It's hard to tell right now until we get the financial numbers, but the Democratic state chair has said that they've raised $700,000 since she's taken up position.
Anderson
back in
Cooper,
February.
25-year-old, young.
Yeah, out of
you know,
Pershing County.
she actually
Clayton.
was.
Anderson
Anderson
Cooper's
Clayton.
I'm sorry. Anderson Clayton. Yeah, she was not the same person. But
gets a
she
little
wasn't the
confusing. Too many
mainstream
Andersons.
Democrat Party's choice, right?
No. Cooper actually backed Bobby Richardson, who was the prior chair for the party. Same with, I think, all of the executive agency on that. Dallas, you may remember
Yeah,
that.
I mean, look, I've been remember I ran the Republican Party for a long time.
Yeah.
We've had some of these battles between sort of outsiders and conservatives. I mean, the new chair of the Democrat Party is an engaging, young, attractive lady. I mean, she does well on television. She's probably been good for them in that sense. At the same time, she talks a lot about engaging people in the rural areas, and that's interesting. At the same time, the Democrats are adopting policies that are unattractive to rural voters,
Right.
and that's not going to change. The Democrats are going to find out when the chair of the Democrat Party gets down and they have to decide how to spend money. They are going to find out that the same decisions that were made by our predecessors make sense, that you have to go chase Democrat voters where they are, and they're mostly in the urban areas. But I just want to get to this larger point, that the Democrats have got into this sexist scapegoating where they go out to Cleta Mitchell and they go out to Tricia Cotham, whether they're engaging, the substance on the election bill, the substance of why Tricia Cotham has changed her positions. They have now put a ridiculous bill forward to try to punish people
Yeah.
who change parties. People have changed parties throughout time. People have changed from Republican to Democrat parties in this state, even as of recently.
Actually, I think that's our tweet of the week is about that bill from Natasha Marcus there. This is her tweet about that bill that would punish people for switching parties.
Yeah, I mean, just how ludicrous this is. Of course, I think first of all, this is just embarrassing for somebody like Senator Marcus. Of course, the terms of the time that a legislator serves are in the state constitution, so no bill can actually alter that. I mean, this is not serious lawmaking, it's politics. Also, by the way, I mean, the answer would be then somebody like Tricia Cotham would just stay a part of your party and vote against, vote on the other side. So what then? Are we then going to find a way to kick people out of office because they don't vote how somebody in party leadership thinks they should? I mean, these are ridiculous, unserious matters.
The idea behind this, too, is not that the seat belongs to the people. It's not that the seat belongs to the lawmaker that won the seat. It's that the seat belongs to the party.
Yes.
And I think that's a dangerous idea.
Yeah, it goes into this whole notion that you're not voting for an individual. You're not looking at their platform. You're looking at the party. And that's the only thing that matters. But that's not how our system is designed. We vote on individuals. My policies are probably going to be different than, or my policy preferences are going to be different than somebody else's, and that should be the part that's discussed. But no, this is just getting into this groupthink mentality, and it's just dangerous for our country.
And Nick, your area, I watch Wilmington and the folks that you serve that way as a microcosm of how the state as a whole operates. What are you hearing from some of the listeners and what you're seeing there on the ground?
Yeah, it was a couple of years ago, I believe it was The Hill, that published 5 counties across the entire United States that they called bellwether counties to see the trend of where politics were going nationwide in New Hanover County, where Wilmington is.
By the way, some very intelligent journalist for Carolina Journal also wrote that, who happens to write the woodshed at carolinajournal.com. So you know.
Potentially, that may have also happened.
Right,
so these bellwether counties, absolutely a phenomenal editor. So New Hanover County is an interesting county. We talked about this pressure campaign. State Senator Michael Lee and Representative Ted Davis were part of the same Democrat pressure campaign on the abortion issue. So New Hanover County it's a purple county. It's one of the fastest growing in the state. Brunswick County right next door is one of the largest geographical counties in the state. They're seeing some big growth. Same thing in Pender and Onslow County. East of 95 is really blowing up in southeastern North Carolina.
Sure.
By the way,
Watch
New Hanover County, one of only 2 counties in North Carolina that went Trump-Biden, Trump in 16, Biden in 20, and the only one of 2 counties that actually went, I believe, McCain in 08 and Biden in 20.
And even more recently, you had New Hanover County where the Board of Education was flipped 4 seats, yet Sherry Beasley won the county. So it's a very interesting county. I've coined this new term, unless Dallas has already coined it, these ping pong voters. I mean, there are people that will vote for Sherry Beasley for Senate and then 4 Republican Board of Education candidates.
And I would remind you that New Hanover County almost accounted for the entire 10,000 vote loss that Pat McCrory had in 2016. Mr. Trump won New Hanover County by about 4,000 votes, and McCrory lost it by 3,000 or 4,000.
I was thinking it was I-77.
It was a huge.
Iredell County that did that.
Well, there's more than one thing,
Sure.
but I mean, the voting difference of the people who voted for Trump and voted for Roy Cooper in New Hanover County was staggering.
Very interesting.
And it really is North Carolina's most important and largest swing county now.
Very interesting. Actually, I'm going to come
So
right
you
back.
have to fix that. You
Yeah.
have to get it over to
we're
the
working on it.
conservative
We're working
side.
on it,
You know.
Dallas.
All right, you had a great interview this week. It's up right now on carolinajournal.com. Dallas Woodhouse had a chance to meet with Representative Virginia Foxx.
Yes, Virginia Foxx, who is now in her 10th term, was elected in 2004, has represented the far northwest area of North Carolina since 2004. She is considered the dean of North Carolina's congressional delegation, has announced that she is going to run again. Virginia will be 80 years old later this month. She would be 81, I believe, if elected to an 11th term. Virginia is known as one of the harder working folks in the delegation. She is, I believe, after knowing her for many years, North Carolina's premier retail politician. She knows everybody in every corner store in the 5th Congressional District.
Sure.
She's also, of course, chair of the the Education and Workforce Committee in the House, one of the more busy committees. She has run a Title IX bill. She has passed the Parents' Bill of Rights in the House, and is now, next up, has a major workforce bill, which is going to try to get people back trained into skill necessary jobs across the country. Very fascinating, but one of the reasons I believe that she wanted to go ahead, and she talked with us right before she makes the announcement at the Republican Party convention, which is occurring the weekend of that this will air, is that we are going to be redrawing the congressional districts again, and she doesn't want anybody to think that her district is forgiven away.
Sure, sure. Now you're headed down there this weekend for the convention, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell me what you're expecting to see.
Well, I mean, realistically, the state of North Carolina should be the pretty much epicenter of politics. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, presidential candidate, he's addressing a keynote crowd on Friday. Right. Mike Pence, who declared earlier this week, is addressing a lunch on Saturday. And then the man himself, former President Donald Trump, will be addressing the crowd on Saturday. Ted Budd is set to be there. Wow. All of our congressional reps are going to be there, state candidates. Of course, the Lieutenant Governor, State Treasurer Mark Walker will also be there. So big 2024 gubernatorial race. Interesting times in NC poll for sure.
Kidding.
This will be one of the larger state conventions, and there are races for party chair and vice chair, but I believe that my take on it is the favorites are the current chair, Michael Whatley, who is, my take on it is pretty popular, as well as the current vice chair, Susan Mills. So I think you'll see continued leadership in that, but that's why they have an election.
So tons of people are going to be there. North Carolina is going to be a huge focus for Republican politics, certainly this weekend. What do you think about that? You've conducted some of your own polls with your own listeners. Where do you think North Carolinians, particularly Republican primary voters, are falling along those lines in the presidential, even though we've got quite some time to work?
I think you'd be hard pressed to find many people that can claim that North Carolina is not a Trump state.
Okay.
Polarizing, he might be controversial, he might be. Trump owns the state of North Carolina, and for people like Ron DeSantis and Tim Scott and Nikki Haley, who, remind you, is just one state south, they're practically in our backyard. They get very little play. Even Mike Pence, they're going to have to try and make the case to people that have already voted for Trump sometimes twice in the primary, twice in the general, why they would be better than him. Right. That's going to be a tough thing to do. And then you look at the 2024 gubernatorial race, and it's the same thing. People voted for Mark Robinson. They already have. They like him. They think he's done a good job as lieutenant governor. Right. He's been all over the state. He's practically been campaigning for 4 years. It's going to be hard for any other candidate to try and say, well, all of those things are great, but this is why I'm better. Candidates are going to have to separate themselves if they want to eat a chunk of that voting block.
Sure. So we were just talking about maps a second ago. Jim, you've been watching that really closely. Tell me what we can expect in the next, say, few months on that.
Yeah, we were always expecting the congressional maps to get redrawn, but with the overturning of the Harper decision, now we have the Senate and the House maps that are going to be redrawn as well. Right. So it's kind of up in the air. We've seen a number of people who have thrown their name in the hat already in the congressional district. I think one other person has thrown their name in the hat for the 1st congressional district, however that may end up looking. Right. The one out east where current incumbent Don Davis is. And now with Virginia Foxx, I'm imagining we're going to see a lot more people starting to kind of put their name out there to say, hey, I'm running again, hey, I'm looking to run, all that kind of stuff.
Well, this happened last time as we were seeing the maps get drawn and then redrawn and redrawn. People were declaring, and then it was almost kind of embarrassing, like they had to pick a different district.
Sure.
And so we'll see if people, there are some candidates who have already announced, but we'll see if there's a little bit more hesitation there to see what things actually look like.
Are you hearing a schedule? Yeah, are you hearing a schedule for a redrawing?
Well, so it's looking like that they want to do all of this redistricting after they finish their main part of session, so after they get the budget passed, but it's starting to look like that's going to take a lot longer than we had anticipated, and so we'll probably see that in the fall after they adjourn.
All right, rocky road ahead. Speaking of rocky roads, a new study came out that said North Carolina has a rough road literally got some really poor conditions on our highways as we're all traveling, going to summer vacations, headed to the beach and the mountains. I'm seeing it myself. What are you hearing?
It's always amazing on my drive up to Raleigh how I know I don't live in Raleigh, but the construction on I-40 through Raleigh seemingly has not moved at all. This group called TRIP, they're a nonprofit and that does road surveys, and they hit states like North Carolina every 4 or 5 years.
Right.
They showed that a third of the states are in either a third of the roads in the state, 33% of them are in either poor or mediocre condition. And one of the interesting things to note, I don't know how big of an impact it is, but as more and more folks get incentivized by the federal government to drive electric vehicles, well, there goes your gas tax. 40.5 cents on every gallon of gas you buy is the state's gas tax.
Right.
You get a whole bunch more people driving EVs. They're not putting into the fund for that. DOT's revenue goes down. Road projects are costing more. Labor's costing more. Materials costing more. It's a recipe for disaster.
Right, and North Carolina has an unusual funding model, I think, for roads. You all might know more about that than I do.
Well, the fact is we have a higher gas tax simply because the state funds more of the road construction. I will say that this is an important issue to talk about, but not one new to our parent company, the Locke Foundation, which has covered this for a number of years. And we have detailed research at the Locke Foundation that talks about the pending crisis in
Sure, we've got a look at this. So 44% are good, 10% are poor. I feel like I know which ones those are. It's terrible.
Yeah, exactly. And you added that 33% poor or mediocre. That's below 50%.
Sure.
That's not good. And unfortunately, you look at a lot of these projects, and they just seemingly go on forever.
Right.
And they just never end. The state actually just yesterday released their new, what they call STIP, the Transportation Improvement Program. It's a 10-year guideline, so it's 2024 through 2033. And they've listed all of their projects out and timelines and money, and they need hundreds of millions of dollars to get some of these projects going that are already scheduled to be under construction. Sure. There's just no money to backfill them.
Right.
It's a rough situation for DOT.
Absolutely. Are you seeing anything at the legislature that might address this? Because I know Vicky Sawyer's been involved in this as well.
I think Senator Sawyer does a good job. I think she's got a good handle on transportation policy, but we actually kind of lost a giant in transportation policy this past year because Senator Kathy Harrington played a major role in our transportation policy, and she has decided to retire from the General Assembly. So now we've got Brad Overcash, a freshman, who's up there now.
Right.
From what I hear, doing a good job, but
yeah.
I don't think he's got the same sort of transportation expertise that Kathy.
Sure, he's doing a good job. It's something that I've been watching a lot as we travel around. But we are running out of time. You want to weigh in here on the road thing, because I know you've been doing a lot of number crunching.
Well, as always, the money's kind of the most important thing for me. And I was looking at the report you talked about. $1.6 thousand was the average for someone in Charlotte, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, in terms of the additional cost because of the delays, because of construction and everything in regards to that.
Yeah, and that's as an individual. And it's like $900 for the Raleigh area, which is astronomical to me. That's including like the damages to the vehicle, as well as like the gas and everything. That is a staggering amount of money.
It is.
And it's just out of everybody's income. That's a lot.
And that's something,
it's only going to get worse as gas tax dries up. They're going to have to deal with something in the state of North Carolina. Is how we recoup people that are not putting gasoline in.
I mean, one of the things that has been discussed for a long time, including by leaders of the Locke Foundation, is something that has tended to not be very popular with conservatives, and that is a miles traveled tax, where if you have an electric car, if you have a gas car, it doesn't matter. You are charged by the mile, and however you charge your car or get gas, you know, it's based on consumption, but there's also a tracking element that people don't like. So.
Sure. Yep. Very interesting. All right, we'll be watching that really closely. Safe travels as you go out this weekend. Thank you for watching the Debrief in Carolina Journal.